It's basically a little time to get some water, take a sip, give some new folks time to come into the room. How we doing? Stefan is not a fan of cars. Uh, anyone else have that same sentiment? Not a big fan of cars? A little bit? Uh, yeah, that's one thing that we find. People tend to not like cars. It's like we're science majors or something, right? You know, like, why do we have to read a bunch of stuff about, like Alexander the Great, as Ed was talking about earlier? But Lynette, here's one cool thing. The thing that I do want to remind you all, when it comes to cars, skills that you work on to develop your ability to do cars well actually transfers over really well into the rest of the sciences. Thanks, appreciate it, Roberto. So the thing is, if you get really good at cars, you get good at analyzing questions, you get at eliminating wrong answers, which then you can apply to a lot of the passage-based questions that you see in other sections, especially in psych-soc, would be a big one. A lot of it does actually work out to be pretty similar. So having good car skills, then that's actually a really good sign. It means you can actually start applying that across. You just got to work on actually noticing when you can do so. And so today, of all the car sessions, is actually the last one that we cover. It's the most complicated, most difficult form of questions that you'll see. It's ones that require you to reason beyond the text. And so the very first part of class today, we're going to focus pretty exclusively on going through a bunch of different types of questions, not necessarily solving them because we're not going to give you passages. We want to work on identifying question types first. In the very end of class, we'll get really deep into solving a bunch of questions with tiny little snippets of passages. Should be pretty fun. All right, so first thing we'll do, as we said, we're going to identify the text, the reasoning beyond the text questions. We'll talk about the structure where you see them, how much of them are, and what they look like. After that, we'll go through a specific subcategory, the weak and strengthen, that are beyond the text questions. And at the very end, we'll go through apply questions. This last section of class today is going to be the most time-intensive. We'll really spend a bunch of time, well, not time-intensive, but the most answering-intensive, where we go through a bunch of questions and do answer them pretty across the board. All right. So let's jump right into it. Remember, if we're going to go through things, we need to first remember our plan of attack, which of course is first you assess. This is the question strategy, right? Not the mapping strategy, right? So that's your scan, label. Scan, read, label, and reflect. This is the question strategy, which of course is APEA. First we assess. Don't read the answer choices. Now, why do you not want to read the answer choices first when you see these types of questions? In cars exclusively. Why do you not bother looking at the answers? Confusion, it's going to persuade you, it's going to mislead you. Did you know that in the cars section especially, they give you a lot of specific types of answers that are misleading on purpose, that will try to draw you into the wrong answers because they know they look good? Distortions are some of the biggest ones, Lynette. That's totally true. And so don't bother looking at the answer choices. They're going to persuade you away from what you want to do. Instead, you got to go with a good prediction, right? So first, just figure out the type of question, and that will let you know what you need to do. Once you know what you need to do, you build your plan. So do you either need to go back to the passage, look up some information? Do you need to just build a formula in your head? Do you need to figure out which ones you can eliminate? And one thing, and this is probably my favorite part of cars in general, you can often actually eliminate the vast majority of the answers without actually knowing what it's asking. You can go through a bunch of these specific types of questions, and this one's not exclusively for beyond the text. These are some really difficult questions we'll do today, but for a good chunk of questions in cars, you can actually do some strategic elimination, find the right answer without even really knowing too much of what the author talked about. Today's questions are very tricky. We're not going to see a lot of that because this is the very last, most challenging question types that we'll see in cars, but for a lot of the more simple ones, you definitely can do so. All right, so you build your plan, which, as we said, sometimes is straight elimination, that you execute it, right? So predict before you peek. That's my favorite way to say this. So predict before you peek. Make sure you know what you're looking for before you dive in and get persuaded away from doing what you need to do on the test. After that, you got to answer. This, of course, is finding the match that works perfectly. So what do you do if you go through and you make a prediction and then none of them work? What do you do if you make a prediction and nothing works altogether? What's your next step? Two things. First, what I would do before you start eliminating, Ashley, is double check. Make sure your prediction was solid, right? Sometimes when that happens, it's that we actually misread the question stem. Do you guys know what we tend to miss when we misread question stems? There's actually certain words. But I do agree, eliminating will be the next step. Yeah, the least, the not, the exclusive, like everything except. You got it. It's so weird that they put them in bold like that, but for some reason when we go through, we'll remember the not for A, we'll remember the not for B, and by the time we get to C and D, we forget that we're looking for something that is not true or something that was not mentioned or whatever it might be. And so make sure you double check that, but yeah, as Ashley says, elimination is honestly going to be your best option if nothing looks that good, but do make sure your prediction's solid first. All right, so let's go through the very first learning goal. We will identify reasoning beyond the text questions. So now it's weird how this image isn't there. I can redraw it because I remember what it's supposed to look like. But this would be a little graph, a little bar graph like this. I believe that it's something like this. Debbie, let me know if that's about accurate. I believe that this would be the rest of the test. So this is the more like within. This is the reading comp. This is all that kind of stuff right there. That's, I believe, 60%. Let me know, Debbie, because it's fun to try to do this from memory. Whereas about 40% of the questions, once again, this is a guesstimate, of the questions are actually reasoning beyond the text. Of that 40%, we have a split between weaken, strengthen, and apply. Weaken, strengthen is more prevalent than apply. Thank you, Debbie. There we go. So yeah, everything's actually, that was impressive. It is 16% for apply, and it's about 24% for strengthen, weaken. So I didn't remember the percentages, but we were pretty close. Thanks, Debbie. I try, right? So it's like I teach you something. All right, so main thing is, notice this is a big chunk of, we have 3 classes on different types of questions. This one is 40%. So if you break it down into 3, this is the most prevalent of them all, which we said they are the most challenging as well. And so you've got to practice these, you've got to be comfortable with them, and so today's class is really going to focus on going through them, of course, first identifying the types of questions, then talk about a couple strategies to really knock them out. All right, so let's kind of jump into this. First thing is we'll go through a couple of different ideas where we're missing evidence, right? So as you can see, it says, how could the author best clarify the statement that literature is rational, or at least contains strongly irrational elements? And so notice here we're looking for how could the author best clarify. So this is why we call this missing evidence. The author didn't fully support their argument in the actual passage, so what we're going to do is actually give more information to, of course, try to see how we can further really clear up the author's argument. All right, so this would be called strengthening. It's going beyond. It's adding extra evidence that supports the author's opinion there. I'll let you guys do this one. How about this one? What are we doing here? Weaken beyond or within the text. So it is weaken, and of course we have weaken because we've got that challenge. I totally agree with that. Challenge is how we know it's weaken. It is beyond Jillian Stefan. Why is it beyond? What's the word that you see in the actual question set that tells you that? So challenging author views, that's exactly right for why it's perfect. Hypothetical findings, which means this is not in the passage, this is not something discussed, so it's going beyond the text. But of course, as you know, we're challenging, so it's definitely a weaken. This is the stuff that you want to start clearly identifying as you go through. Be like, okay, this is going to be something brand new. It doesn't have to be in the passage whatsoever, and we mostly know that it's going to be something that does weaken the author's argument, and that's extra information. Nice work. All right, so here's another example of missing evidence. Let me know what kind of question this is. Nice, Tadell, Rockstar. It is another weakening beyond. So we're looking for the most reasonable objection to the conclusion would be that. And so did anyone kind of get wigged out when they read this, first and foremost? I actually remember this passage. It's a weird one. It's an actual AMC passage. In fact, everything we go through today is actual AAMC questions from actual old MCATs from before that is still applicable to the new version of the MCAT. I like it, Stefan. You got it. You want some pizza now? Totally true. So we're talking about like prototypical pizza. It challenges the prototype model by suggesting. So notice we're looking for a reasonable objection to the conclusion. So we are looking for something to object to this author's conclusion, and it's not stated in the passage. So we're identifying a new objection we could basically fit in as well. All right, good work. How about this one? Let's do the same thing. So the author implies Portuguese ambassador applauded the French National Assembly. Genuine sympathy for their ideas. This is a little weird. What do you think? Is it weaken, strengthen, neither? Cadell's spot on. We're still reasoning beyond the text. I completely agree. We're looking for some kind of brand new alternatively is your keyword there, right? So alternatively, we could be explaining that, but it's neither weaken nor strengthen. So we just call this alteration. So it's an alternative theory. You got it's neither weakening nor strengthening. We're just trying to find an alternate theory on basically, you know, the ambassador's action. You know, cool. So something other than genuine sympathy for their ideas. Maybe they had some other kind of agenda going on. Exactly true. Nice work. Cool. All right, so those are the ones that we see with missing evidence, right? So it's introducing new evidence. As you can see, primarily when we are trying to introduce new evidence, it'll primarily either weaken or strengthen, but it could also just be a straight up altering the passage. Like here's a whole new thing that we didn't even talk about. Now, I'm going to get a little bit specific about strategies for these. There's a general strategy that we talk about in CARS. What's the first kinds of answer choices that you eliminate? Generally speaking. Strong, extremes, only, must, never, that kind of language should, right? We just generally don't trust that kind of language. It's too strong, it's too extreme. What I want to warn you, though, is that in these weaken and strengthen type questions, you do not want to instantly eliminate those extremes. Totally true, Giselle, exactly true. Because the thing is, if you really want to well, and also that's true, unless the author themselves is extreme, I also completely agree with that. If the author is extreme, yeah, you want to find extreme answers. Generally speaking, though, most authors aren't extreme. The reason is, I don't know if you guys knew this, but did you know that every single passage that you'll see in CARS on test day was actually published? The AAMC does not write CARS passages from scratch. They pull publications, and then they actually... You know, they can edit them, they can abridge them, but they give you actual publications. And think about things that have been published. If you're going to write something, how often are people who are publishing things in various journals have extremely strong stances? Like, especially with the type of stuff we're talking about. Like, yeah, it shows up once in a while, but it's pretty darn rare that you'll see an extreme view, especially if it's something that's getting published and not being written to be silly and being in a test. So, if you're going to fall back on something, I totally agree with you guys. Eliminate extremes. Don't trust them, right? It's not going to work. If the author is extreme, which does happen, but it's not common, don't eliminate extremes. The third is, if the question stem itself is weaken or strengthen, don't eliminate extremes, because if you really want to weaken an argument by making something never true or always true, you can really, really weaken an argument. And especially if you're looking for an answer or question stem that says, which of the following will most weaken, this generally shows up in reasoning within the text, not reasoning beyond the text, but those are the ones you don't want to eliminate extremes. It's not that your answer needs to be extreme, it's just that you don't want to right off the bat write them off and eliminate them. So do be aware of that. It's a little strategy piece to kind of fit in here. So be on the lookout for those. All right, so now other way we can do this is finding evidence's effect on a conclusion. So here's a good example here. So what kind of question do we have here? So we got a lot of folks typing in the chat. It's a little bit different than before. Main difference now is that, so we're assuming that the author's friend Dave was interviewed. If Dave remarked that he and the author often argued, You got it. So now here's the interesting thing that's kind of different. So now notice we're bringing in new information that is beyond the text, but we're seeing how it's going to weaken arguments from within the text. So it's by introducing, it's kind of like totally true. It's like the opposite of before. Now we're bringing in new information and seeing how it weakens a claim within the passage. So it's bringing outside information and seeing how it affects inside information, if that makes sense. Should we as authors? I'm not sure you mean that. Yeah, here we don't actually know what the assertion is exactly. Yeah, I see what you're saying, Tadell. Yeah, we don't actually know what assertion it is, but it also means we need to make sure that it is an author's assertion in the answer choice, and especially one that has to be weakened. Exactly, and it would have to be in the passage. Totally true. Here we don't have passages. We're working on identifying just the types. Don't worry though, we are going to move on to actually solving a bunch of questions. Just as I said, the very first part of class, we're going to focus on just identifying. And here's it. Well, actually, we can't answer without the passage, but we could maybe do some strategic eliminating here. So first things first, let me know what we're actually doing here. So this one's a little more vague. So yeah, well, we know that we're doing weakening, strengthening, right? Because as you can see, the answer choices say either more or less plausible, right? So where in the question stem actually shows that we're, like, where's the language that actually weaken, strengthen language? That's one of them. And the answer is two as well. You got it. There's another one too there, Stefan. It's that suppose there. Suppose introducing brand new information. So here's the cool thing. If you ever see a question and start with that suppose right there, of course it means that we're going to be introducing new information, which means most likely we are going to be either weakening or strengthening. The difference here is that the answer choices themselves make us figure out whether they're weakening or strengthening. So it's introducing whole new information. We're seeing how it affects a claim, but it doesn't specifically have to be weaken or strengthen. So that's the trick with the suppose right there. Nice call on that. We are introducing new information. Of course, the last sentence, it means that the author's thesis is either going to be increased, decreased. So now let's do a little bit of strategy here. Which of these answer choices do you not trust? Kale's got a great answer there. Agree, because we're not specifically trying to weaken or strengthen, right? If we knew we were trying to weaken or trying to strengthen, then we wouldn't eliminate extremes, but you guys got it. Confirmed, strong language. Disproved, even stronger language. Do not trust it. You got it. So get rid of both of those. It's probably going to be B or D. B or C, excuse me, but since we don't have the passage, we won't really know whether the skull either supports or non-supports the passage. Perfect. Nice work. All right, so let's jump into apply questions. So let's look at these right here. So suppose a painting contained words with no apparent relevance to the scene depicted. The passage suggests that discussing the painting, the author would most likely to. This one's a weird one, right? So notice what we're doing here is that we're bringing in a whole new information. So we have another suppose, same as before. But notice now we're not necessarily weakening or strengthening, right? Instead, we're supposing informational, and then we're trying to find the author would most likely something. So what do you call these? I guess this we call it like a response, but there's other ways you can refer to this. Yeah, I agreed, Ariel. I call it an inference. It's a response. We're looking for what the author's response would be, which means we're inferring something the author would actually say. So the author would, pretty much whatever this thing is, there's no apparent relevance to the scene. There's no words, or sorry, there's apparently words on it. We want to see what the author would actually think about that. So I would agree with Ariel there. This would be a type of inference. You have to infer what the author would actually do, given the passage, of course, with this new hypothetical situation. That's what these apply questions are. We're applying brand new information from outside sources, in this case, new painting with no words, and seeing, of course, how it relates to the author's argument. Nice. Here's another one. this one. Similar, right? So once again, it's been said that we're looking for something that might reasonably be expected. I agree. Another inference here. We got to figure out what's going on. Here we're inferring an outcome. Exactly. So this is a different. We have a bunch of different language here, but it's different terms that we use as we go through all this stuff. But it's types of inferences that are totally true. Exactly true. Nice work. Good work. So notice what we're really doing here is we're just showing you different types of questions, and we'll go through a bunch really soon. In fact, we do tons of apply questions in the last class today. We want you to see that the questions aren't always very straightforward. They're not always going to say, what did the author say, or what does the author think about this? You're going to give you whole new information, such as, not just what the author says, but it's been said this thing, so now we have to infer, of course, what this young writer would be expected to do. I'm totally bringing in notice outside the scope of the passage or beyond the text. All right, here's another one. We call, actually just go through these so we jump to some questions. But notice once again we have another suppose. It's our strong language there. So suppose new inside information or outside information says the author would most likely to argue that this difference exists becomes. Oops. It's another probable hypothesis, but same thing again. We're trying to infer, of course, what the author would say. So what the author would most likely argue, of course, with this new information. All three are examples where we're applying new information, bringing it into the question stem, and seeing, of course, how it relates to the passage and the argument being presented. Cool, exactly. There we go. As Debbie says, that's the reason we're bringing these up. We're going to kind of jump in. Yeah, we got 3 more of these. We'll show different types of questions. We'll go through and actually solve a bunch of this stuff. So there's loads of different types. Actually, just 2 more here. Cool. So as you can see, these are other examples of apply. It says, which of the following best exemplifies? So in this case, notice we're looking for something that exemplifies the author's assertion. So we're looking for something that's totally supports the author's claim, more evidence. Notice we're bringing in, though, new evidence that wasn't stated in the passage. So we're looking for, in the answer choices, we have new information, where in the question stem, it's actually giving the author's assertion itself. So now in this case, the outside or beyond the passage is in the answer choices, not in the question stem. And that's what we're mostly trying to show you here, is that with these apply questions, we just saw a bunch of different examples of them. The outside information can be within the question stem, or it can be within the answer choices themselves. But I agree, we're looking for something that best exemplifies, that supports the author. Good call, Stefan. Or still says more evidence. This is a really weird one, but this is another good example. Clearly, as you can see, in this case, the stuff that is beyond the text is in the answer choices once again. I'm a big fan of this passage. It's actually a good one. Because I have a hunch the author probably wasn't talking about pterodactyls, but as you know, pterodactyls are very hip right now. Exactly. And so the main thing is, notice we have a couple different relationships here. We've got either, we've got things hunting one thing, so mouse, other way around. Cats hunt mice, or you have lions hunt gazelles, or you have a thing that doesn't care about a thing, or you have something that doesn't really make much sense because pterodactyls and birds didn't really exist in the exact same timeline in history. So notice, while these examples are super weird, it's still just doing an application question where what we're trying to do is find, of course, the same general idea of, is it that they are hunting or dislike each other one way or the other, or is it an indifference? And so indifference, or is one stalking or hunting or disliking or attacking the other one? That's the thing with these question stems. Don't focus on the specifics, right? Get the general idea. Find what's similar, and of course what we're trying to find out here, does the king dislike the royal society? Does it not really care about them? Is it an aggression? Is it not aggression? What do you think about that one? Yes, you got it. The Teal knows. All right. So don't let the answer choices wake you out. That's the main idea that we're going through here. That's just a bunch of examples. From this point on, we'll actually have you guys solve a bunch of questions. I just wanted to show you a little handful of a bunch of different types of ways that you can see these beyond the text questions show up. So as we said, there's a long question stem. Just go to the end of the question, figure out what you're being asked to do. We said this before in terms of, it says suppose. We have said almost every time you guys are pointing out the last question or last sentence is the actual question. In fact, this is one thing I highly encourage. Do you ever find yourself reading a CARS question and then at the end realize that you don't even really know what you just read? Ever find yourself doing that? You're like, oh my god, what did that even say? So much, right? And so if you find yourself doing that, what I highly encourage you to do, instead of going back and reading the entire thing, just reread the last sentence of the question stem itself. This is for when it's super long, you read it, you're like, oh my god, I don't even know what happened. It will give you the fundamental of, okay, are we looking for something the author agrees with, something the author disagrees with? After you've got that general idea, then go back, read the rest of the question. Once you have the context of knowing whether you're either going supporting, going against, or trying to figure out whether it's weakening or strengthening. So try that next time that it happens, reread the last sentence, then go back, reread it. I bet it'll make way more sense than going back and just rereading again from the beginning, which rarely actually does what we want it to do. All right, so once again, also, remember, in the question stem itself, sometimes it directs you to reread something, or of course something is from your online outline itself. Last is the hypothetical language. Remember, the hypotheticals can either be in the question stem, or they can be in the answer choices themselves. All right, so whatever type of question you have will determine what it is that we're going to do as we go through and approach these questions. All right, so let's go through and do some. Let's attack a bunch of weak and strengthened questions. And of course, the last part of class will be attacking a bunch of apply questions. All right, so now I do want to let you guys know we're not going to be doing a bunch of reading and outlining today. We are going to stick pretty exclusively to questions themselves. And a lot of what we'll do is give you little snippets and chunks of passages to go through. All right, so let's go through a couple elements of arguments. First, I can't drive to work today because the highway is closed. So tell me, what is the conclusion here? What's the conclusion? See, we actually get this switched around. The main idea, though, the conclusion, think about what's the main point that they're trying to tell you. If someone told you this, what is the net effect they want you to know? It's that, sounds like you would probably be their employer, and it's that, I'm not going to be at work today, right? If someone's going to say this to you, it means, hey guys, sorry I ain't going to make it, which is the primary fact. The highway being closed is their excuse. It's the evidence. It's why they're not coming to work today. The way a lot of people think about this is try to think of it as the headline or the main point or what it is that the person is actually trying to express. In which in this case it is that they're not working. They ain't going to work. Basically that's the main idea. So now if this is the conclusion, can't drive to work today, evidence supporting it, highway is closed, which of the following would most strengthen the author's argument? Now there's not answer choices here. Just let me know. What would actually strengthen this person's argument? Jillian, you are a rock star. That is exactly true. If you can't go to work today because the highway is closed, then it better be the only way that you could get to work. Perfect. There's no other roads that lead to work. You can't take side roads. You can't take other pathways. That would strengthen the argument here, that there's no other possible way. Now notice this is extreme. We're using language like only. It's the only way. There's no other road because it's a weak and strengthen, right? This is the time that we actually want to use this. All right. So notice there's your conclusion, of course. Notice it's sitting on that evidence. The conclusion, of course, is that you're not driving to work because the highway's closed. But notice this conclusion. I'll do that again. Notice, oh, hey, look, it's a little wobbly, right? So the only way that this conclusion is going to be solid and not be all wobbly like that is if we introduce a new bit of evidence, which is that the only way to get there, of course, that the only way to get to work is that one highway that happens to be stolen. Cool. Love the wobble. It's awesome. Isn't that neat, right? We're showing pictures that express ideas. Science, right? Welcome to the future. I do. All right. So that's the main thing. So then, of course, how about this? Which of the following is true would most weaken the author's argument? How about that? Same thing as before. It's true. Oh, man. Yeah, just that there's other ways to get to work. There's a bunch of ways that you could bike to work instead, that you have a jetpack you could throw on and fly yourself to work, or a helicopter. There's loads of ways you can introduce this that would actually weaken the argument. Exactly, if there is other routes possible. So there's 5 other drivable routes to work. Notice that evidence, of course, is going to cause this conclusion to collapse. That's, of course, notice the wobble. Now it's waiting on the other side, so instead of supporting the conclusion, it collapses the conclusion. It's falling down in front. That's, once again, animations are where it's at. Torque, as Debbie says, you got it. It would flip. Oh, man. So true. We could even get into physics if you want, talking about the animations. It's great. You guys gave a bunch of different examples, but that's what it's all about. Good examples. All right, so let's do it for real now. So here's an example question. Let's actually, I'm going to bring up a, actually, one of the other teachers, I actually just brought it up. Let's bring this guy. I just did. It was we already have one made from the last class, so I figured that was easy. So throw your answers into this poll in the lower right. We're going to actually start solving some questions now. So throw your answer into that poll. Oh, here, let me give you a... So notice you don't even need the passage here. We're looking for a fact that strongly supports the author's image of John as resistant to social change in his realm. So all we have to do is find something that talks about him being resistant to social change. What sounds the closest to resistant to social change? Answers are shifting really nicely. I'll show you where we're at because we do have majority of class already voting. We got like 61% of you saying answer choice B. I totally agree with you. We're looking for something that talks about social change. Of course, notice we're looking for a strengthened keyword. We're looking for new information in the question stem itself. Oh no. Yeah, I was going to say, if you've taken the old AMC practice test, some of these are pulled directly Nikhil. That is totally true, as we said. So of course, notice, there we go. We want to, of course, your assess is that it's a strengthened keyword. Your plan, of course, is you want to isolate the conclusion, find the evidence that supports it, which we said, of course, was social change. Execute, find something about social change. And we had everybody saying it. Answer, of course, only one that talks about social change at all is reforms. And it says that he revoked reforms. Thus, of course, he didn't like social change. He's not letting it happen. Be a way to say it. Understandable. Yeah, before they retire, Nikhil. It's cool. Well, we use them a bunch for a lot of these car sessions, but even if you've seen the answer before, mostly focus on the structure because we're utilizing old AMC examples that are still relevant because they still support the same question structure. We actually had to cut a ton of them because a lot of the old MCAT stuff wasn't relevant to the new stuff, so we just took the stuff that was best, stuff that still worked. All right. Here's another one. Right here, I'm going to give you a little chunk of the passage. Well, actually, we'll go through the steps first. So assess what kind of question is this? Let's go through the steps first, and then we'll give you the passage if you need to research. So another inference for sure, and notice, is it within, beyond? So notice what's beyond, of course, is actually in the answer choices themselves. So we're looking for future evidence, right, that isn't stated in the passage stem itself. That's, of course, in the answer choices. So in this case, there's nothing outside the scope of the passage in the question stem. The answer choices, though, exactly as Noah is saying, if it had hypotheticals, as Debbie's bringing up right there, so of course we do want to identify the passage and, of course, figure out which of these is most relevant to the passage itself. So here's your passage. All right, now throw your answers in. You might need that a little bit. Try to find something that could have avoided the unfavorable attention of Napoleon. So figure out where the passage talked about Napoleon not liking Portugal. So what pissed off Napoleon? Agree. Notice it says, no, after conquering half of Europe, reached out to the little state that was refusing to join his continental bloc of Britain. Exactly. Napoleon is pissed off at Britain, right? And so, of course, if Portugal is gonna, be hanging out with Britain, that's gonna piss him off a little bit. Exactly true. So, which of these answer choices is, of course, closest to that? And looking at our answer choices, it looks like we're pretty good. Man, Napoleon, it's so easy to piss off Napoleon, though, especially when you're Portugal. And we do have about 70% of you going for answer choice A, and I totally agree. It's all about Britain. It's the only answer choice that specifically brought up Britain, and we knew that he was pissed because they refused to join his blockade of Britain. Exactly true. A's the only one that's got the right words to it. Nice work. All right, let's do the next one. We'll do the same thing. Notice we don't even need all the answer choices here. If you glance at it right off the bat, and that's your first thing, well, we'll go through the questions then. What kind of question is this first? Ooh. These are rare question types. We don't see these very often. Yeah, sometimes they're called paradox questions, where we're given something that seems like it shouldn't be compatible, but they actually are. And so a couple ways you can describe them. Notice we're reconciling two different pieces of evidence or two different arguments. So we're trying to find out if these are compatible. We generally call these paradox questions. So now here's the thing. All we want to do, of course, is figure out how we can make these two things compatible. It says that children can infer the rules of language without instruction, yet old kids are still ungrammatically correct by adult standards. So we want to find something that reconciles the two together, that you can have kids figuring it out on their own, but they're still not very grammatically correct in terms of adult standards. So what do you think? Is this reconcilable or non-reconcilable? What do you think? It's possible to infer the rules of language without being instructed, yet speech of older children is often ungrammatical by adult standards. There's a couple ways you could say this. I mean, think about it. In the real world, do kids often have great grammar? No. Does that mean that they can't infer the rules of language on their own? No, not at all. It just means they're probably not good at it yet, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't infer the rules of grammar. You're probably good at doing that. They just haven't practiced. They haven't gotten good at it yet, right? So that means if we're going to try to make a good guess here, we'd say right off the bat, probably going to be one of the yeses. It is possible, of course, to identify the paradox, which we just did, which was that, of course, they can figure out the rules on their own, yet they're not that good at it. And so we want to read the yes answers first. It's all grayed out, so I can't really see them very clearly. It pops up now. There we go. There. Which one looks better? I'll clear this out. Actually, I'll at least hide these. Let me know whether A or B looks closer. So which one is the direct link between young kids inferring rules on their own and they're not that good at it yet? And as you can see, we've got like a lot of folks answering. We'll let the rest of you throw in your answers though. Nice. So one of these, of course, is bringing up information that's outside the scope of the paradox. Nice work. It is answer choice A. Notice, of course, A is the one that does it. Notice we're just trying to say that we can infer the rules of language on their own and that they're not that good at it. That's fine. It doesn't mean that it was, of course, disrupted by adults' attempts to teach grammar. That's outside the scope of the paradox, right? We're just trying to relate these two things together, and A, of course, does that. So it's not only the early aptitude, exposure, right, practice, and, of course, the community that they're learning from, all would contribute, of course, to how competent they are. Additionally, if you look at answer choice B there, notice B says may be distributed by. In this case, we're trying to reconcile an argument. We want strong language that's going to connect the dots together. And so, of course, you don't want wishy-washy language if you are trying to resolve a paradox, as we have here. Cool. All right, I think we got one more of these, and then we'll jump to our last learning goal. Yep. So how about this one? What kind of question is this one? Definitely weaken, you got it. So for success, we got a weaken question. So notice in this one, it says, which of the following statements of advice most strongly challenges the argument made in the passage. So in this case, the thing that's outside the scope of the passage is once again the answer stems themselves, right? So within the passage, we're actually relating it, so that's fine. It's just that the answer choices are the ones that are going outside the passage. All right. So we know it's weaken. We got to figure out what we had in the passage. Well, let's give you the passage. So that's a little chunk from the passage. Let us know what you think. All right, looking great. We got to trust the writing process itself, and as 87% of you are saying, of course, actually, no, we switched around. Oh, it's not for you to find another line of work. Actually, I thought you guys were all saying, oh, no, you're right. You're totally correct. That does challenge it. Spot on. You guys are awesome. You got it. So if we want to challenge the argument in the passage that they need to trust the process, telling them to quit, that's totally going to challenge the statement that you should just learn to trust the process of writing itself. Totally true. So of course, A, C, and D are all examples of sounds like what would be trusting the process, which is probably very true in terms of learning to write and get really good at writing. It doesn't come naturally. It takes a long time. Yeah, totally agree, Ashley, as well. Young writers should not worry about being published for 20 years or so. That's kind of a random number, and also we don't like those shoulds so much. I like it. All right. All right, let's jump into our last one. So the very last thing we'll do in class today, actually before we do that, let's kind of discuss what we just covered. So remember when we're talking about weak and strengthen, you need to identify the conclusion that's being addressed, right? Sometimes it's going to be the answer stem, sometimes it's going to be the answer choices itself. So predict the type of answer that's going to have the effect that you want. Remember, you want to be strong enough, as we said, for these weak and strengthen questions, right? We do, of course, like that strong language, you at least need to be strong enough to connect the dots together between whatever it is you're trying to do. Cool. Awesome. Thanks, Matt. I appreciate it. This is fun. You know, people give CARS a hard time, but I think CARS can actually be your friend. It really can. All right, and then, of course, at the very end, you need to figure out whether or not the answer is actually correct. All right, so let's do our last part of today. Third goal and final goal is going to be, of course, to attack a bunch of apply questions. These are the trickiest of them all for most of us, to be totally true. Yeah, check. Oh, man, there's so many good channel shows showing up all the time, too. Come to a bunch of them. I'll be honest, I'm a bigger fan of the science stuff, but man, CARS sometimes just, the cool thing about it is it really gets you to think about the MCAT structurally, and really getting to think of it in terms of structure really kind of goes beyond a lot of the content. It really applies to all parts of the test. It's pretty great. All right, so let's go back into the argument thing. Oh, man. All right, so same thing as before. Suppose I can't drive to work today. Which of the following passage contentions would be, of course, easiest to refute? And so we'll do the same thing that we kind of did before. So I guess first things first, what's the conclusion here? Or how about this? Why don't we kind of come up with a couple conclusions? So suppose I can't drive to work today. So we want to find something that would be the easiest to refute. Yeah, there's a bunch of little things you could say. So main thing is here we have this evidence rights, which is, of course, suppose evidence says I can't drive to work today. Conclusion, of course, you could say a bunch of different things. So now here's the one thing, with, as Emma says there, so 10 inches of snow, totally true. More specifically, though, you want to get really structural, right? So if you can't drive to work today, you probably also can't drive to the store. You probably also can't drive anywhere else. You got it. Well, actually, I guess it's an easy refute. So The conclusion that'd be really shaky is that you can't drive to the store. Why would this be a really shaky conclusion, actually? I would also say the snowing. You could also say it's a shaky conclusion. Look at that wobble. James made this one. I love the wobble. Wobble, wobble. It's a type of dance, I know. Bingo, Ashley, right? Because it might just be that the road to work is closed. It might not be that all of the roads are closed. Exactly. It might be a different road. Totally true. So it's not necessarily a strong argument because we don't really know if there's a connection between the two. If instead we said, suppose my car is broken today, then that's going to be a much more strong argument. Exactly. It's too broad. Totally true. It's going too far. All we know for sure is that we can't drive to work today. All right. So then, of course, we could also say which of the following claims is most likely to be true. So suppose I can't drive to work today. What's something that would most likely to actually be true? This is kind of a tricky one. Yeah, so what's a conclusion that's very supportable, as Evan's saying? That's a great way to describe it. We're doing different than the last one, so we won't do the store thing we talked about before. We'll kind of treat this in its own. Maybe, Stefan, if you bring in the maybe, we don't want to trust it, though. So, maybe I agree that it could be true. I'm going to get really strong here. So if you want the most solid conclusion possible, you don't want to let it have any actual wobble in there. So a good thing you could say is, well, if you know you can't work today, well, then if you do go to work, you sure aren't driving there. Now, does anyone be like, well, yeah, no, duh? Anyone kind of say that? Like, well, yeah, clearly, if I'm not driving to work today, if I go to work, I'm just not driving there. Here's the thing. This happens so much where the actual answer is going to be like, yeah, well, clearly, if you can't drive to work today, if you get to work, you must have gotten there somewhere else. What would cause this conclusion to even be a little bit further to the side is you said, if I get to work today, someone else drove me there. That's not necessarily true either because maybe you took the bus. Maybe you get a ride, maybe you take a bus, but any of those fit into the context that you're not driving to work today. So you want to leave it kind of more general enough that, of course, you're not necessarily going to make it untrue. Because the whole snowstorm, car being broke, maybe it's the highway, maybe it's a rain or hailstorm. You guys see what I'm getting at here? So you want to find the thing that necessarily must be true. Cool. All right, be careful. Generally speaking, these things are actually way more straightforward than you'd expect. This has no wobble whatsoever. Gotcha. Okay, gotcha. Perfect, Matt. Good to hear it. Just think, does it wobble? Does it not wobble? Of course, what would be even more strong is like, I have a workplace. If you're saying that I can't drive to work today, that means, first of all, that you have a job because you're not, going to work, and additionally, your job is not at home. So notice these things are super strong statements. They fit completely within the realm of evidence, and they must be true. So these are the wobble-less statements, if that makes sense. Whereas, of course, I can't drive to the store, super, super wobbly. Very, very wobbly. Incredibly wobbly. All right. I'm gonna learn how to do the wobble after this class, which is a dance. I heard the wobble is a type of dancing. I don't know what it looks like, but I know it's a thing. Debbie told me. All right. So let's do this question first. It's true. Debbie knows. She knows all of these things. All right, first things first, let's do, of course, the A. So what are your keywords in the question stem that tell us, of course, that it's weaken or strengthen? And, I mean, the page says weaken or strengthen, so we know, but what's the language here that tells us that? Two things. Most likely, as well as another key one. We talked about it before. So this is our assess step, right? Suppose, exactly true, right? So suppose, jump right to the question, which says, what would the author's reaction to such a policy? So we have this new information, 25% of the graduate students, permanent faculty. We're going to figure out, of course, how this the author would react to this. Cool. Perfect. So we're looking for something that most likely be the author's reaction. So we're looking for something that the author would agree with, something the author must agree with. All right, so the plan for this one, we got to know whether the author supports it or goes against it, so we need the passage. So let's actually do the research. Here's your passage. I'm going to clear out those answers in case they're old. Throw your answers in the poll if you haven't already done so. As Debbie says, these are common. You see the support, support, oppose, oppose, weaken, weaken, strengthen, strengthen. So what must the author actually say about this whole university instituting a 25% of its own graduate students as permanent faculty? Well, according to this little question stem here, it says, what's needed is educators willing to live where they work and work where they live. This sounds exactly like the kind of thing the author would like, which is why 100% of you selected answer choice A. Look at that. Seriously, it's so rare that we get 100% corrects. In fact, there's this little glitch that happens in the system where these stars just start appearing. I don't know where they come from or how they appear, but whenever we get 100%, it just happens. Super weird, right, Emma? Super weird. I don't understand it at all. All right. Let's do the next one. We got a couple more of these before we get out of here. Yeah, black star, right? Oops. Let me open that up again. All right, same thing as before. So once again, let me know, what are the words in the question stem when you do your assessment? That's the strongest one, totally. Possible to refute, and we're looking for passage contentions, right? So things that the author contends in the passage that is possible to refute, which means, of course, we're still doing unsupportable conclusion. I guess it has, of course, the answer on the page for you right there. So we're looking for something that would be possible to refute, clear counterexamples. So that means all of these answer choices are actually pulled directly from the passage. Now what's outside or beyond the passage is us making up counterexamples that would clearly refute. That's the key word here. Clear counterexamples. Oh, this is looking great. Yeah, once again, you guys are 100%ing this. This is awesome. So a couple ways you can go through this. You could find one that sounds like it has a super clear way to counterexample it, or you could find ones that would be very difficult to provide a clear counterexample. Do any of these just sound like they have super weird, hard to provide counterexamples? There's a couple that sound like they'd be very hard to disprove. Incredibly hard to disprove, to be totally honest. Yeah, actually, one for sure. Intelligence tends to paralyze natural impulses. How do you get evidence of people's natural impulses being paralyzed? That's a crazy difficult thing to do, especially a poet's independently, right? Which means if that's definitely not going to be true, you can get rid of, oh, hey, C and D. Awesome, so it's got to be either A or B right off the bat. And which one sounds like it's a more clear counterexample to refute? Cool. Well, looking at your answers, it sounds like a lot of people definitely like answer choice 3, which is why we do have 72% for you going for answer choice B. Nice work. We're looking for a vulnerable claim and eliminating it right. So we got rid of 1, we got rid of 2. The great nations of history, notice of history, thus recorded history, were founded on aggression. That's something you can look up in the history books. You can figure out how those nations got strong. All right, so actually, since we're near the end, I'm going to jump to one of our favorite examples here. Let's go to question, actually, where is that one at? There it is, 19. Let's do this one. This is a solid one. All right, so once again, let's do our assessment first. What do you notice in the question stem itself when you do your assessment? Yeah, we're looking for a reasonable expectation. So we're looking for something not within the passage, right? Once again, going beyond, but we have to make some kind of outside beyond the past apply expectation for something on Freud's view of religion. So totally good work. You guys got it. So plan, we got to find the passage. So let's pull up the passage. Hmm. All right, so execute looks like it says Freud believed that the process of growth humanity was bound to turn away from religion. So something about turning away from religion. And we actually have a pretty good split between two answer choices. Do you guys want to guess which two we have the biggest split between? Any guesses which two we might be going for? You got it, C and D. Totally true. So that membership in non-religious organizations will increase, once again turning away from religion, and attendance at religious services will decline. Now, here is the thing that we have to be very careful for. Now, which is more direct? Which one is directly saying exactly what Freud said and not bringing in outside things that might not be true? You guys got it. It's got to be D. C may be true, but we don't know about non-religious organizations. We didn't talk about non-religious organizations. All we said was that we're not going to go to church as much, or at least we're going to turn away from religion, which is why we do have almost everybody going for answer choice D. That's one of the clearest examples of ones, and I love that it has answer choice C there, because yeah, that could be true. We just don't know where they're going to go instead. And that's why C can't be true, because it isn't necessarily true. Only D perfectly matches with Freud's opinion. All right. I gotta say, I had an excellent time working with you all. I hope you guys all had fun too. Big thanks to big thanks to all the other teachers who were rocking it so much. I do know a couple of them put a lot of work into actually helping build this class, so that was super fun. And it was great to work with them. All right, so keep coming back to the channel. We got loads of classes coming up throughout the next several months leading up to test day. We'll hang out after class and answer any questions you guys have in the Q&A. But have a fantastic rest of your evening, and good job staying up and watching MCAT channel. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.